Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to my movie vlog. My name is John Campea, and this is our weekly Sunday video looking at the box office results that have come in, and fortunately kind of having to sit back and look at the continued downfall of Justice League. But first, before we do any of that, let's get to the actual box office numbers this weekend. The top 5 at the box office this week come in looking like this. It is the exact same order, at least at any rate, as last weekend's box office. We've got coming in at number 1 is Coco, making $26 million. Now that brings it up to $108 million domestically already, and a worldwide total of almost $280 million so far. Not bad for a little Pixar film that a lot of people, including myself, didn't think would do that well. Coming in at number 2, Justice League, taking another 60% drop, coming in at $16.5 million. Now, this is actually kind of crucial to remember, unfortunately, and that's that Justice League takes a 60% drop despite no other major films opening in the box office this weekend. No other wide release films opened, and yet it still took another 60% drop. And we'll get a little bit more into that in just a second. Coming in third place is the new film Wonder, making another $12.5 million. Thor Ragnarok crosses the $800 million worldwide number, making an additional $9.6 million domestically, bringing its worldwide total up to $618 million. Sorry, $816 million worldwide. It should pass Wonder Woman at the box office this week sometime. And Daddy's Home 2 picks up another $7.5 million at the box office. So that leaves us here talking about this. Forbes Magazine, is shortly after the weekend box office numbers came out, Forbes Magazine put out an article kind of analyzing the trajectory of the Justice League box office. And what they basically came up with so far is this, is that Justice League, in all likelihood, is not going to hit $700 million. It may not even catch Man of Steel's worldwide box office returns, but I kind of think it will. I think it will exceed Man of Steel's box office. Then again, I'm the guy who has said for 6 months that Justice League would easily crack $1 billion at the box office, so what the hell do I know? But anyway, the Forbes magazine went on to say this. Forbes magazine said, so yeah, it will cross 600 million global before the end, and it may end up closer to 650 million than 625 million. But the numbers are just too small, even with, thus far, halfway decent legs. It's got 1.5 weeks before Walt Disney's Star Wars: The Last Jedi and Fox's Ferdinand drops the hammer on everything, followed by Jumanji, All the Money in the World, Pitch Perfect 3, The Greatest Showman, The Shape of Water, Downsizing, and WB's own Father Figures. Now, I'm doing this video live, which I don't normally do on Sundays, but I'm doing this video live right now. So for those of you who are watching live, I'm actually going to want to take your thoughts and opinions on all this. If you want to get your thought and opinion on the show here quickly, just tweet to me at John Campea. Fire out a tweet at John Campea, and I'll get through just as many of your tweets, your thoughts and opinions as I possibly can. Maybe you'll see your tweet pop up here on the bottom of the screen. So start firing those in. Here's the really concerning thing about this. Is, again, we have mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. This is Justice League. This was the movie that, once again, was supposed to be DC's answer to the Avengers. This is the movie franchise that was supposed to be able to compete with the Avengers as possibly being the number 1, maybe number 2, maybe outside number 3 biggest comic book movie box office of all time. Instead, it has sputtered and it has failed on that level. I mean, as any other movie, look, if you're going to look at a movie and talking about a movie maybe hitting $700 million, you'd feel damn good about that. But this is not just any other movie. This is Justice League. This is the accumulation of the 5-year plan. The 5th film of the DCEU that was supposed to really ring it in, and there's a question mark in the air now as if it's even going to hit $700 million. Now, let's put this into perspective with some other films that have come around that neighborhood at this point. I mean, The Amazing Spider-Man, the reboot, made $758 million. Justice League's not going to come anywhere close to that. We've got X-Men Days of Future Past, an X-Men film. It's not going to come close to that. Suicide Squad is going to make more money than Justice League. Wrap your head around that for a moment, folks. Suicide Squad is going to end up making more money at the box office than Justice League is. You would have been hit in the head with a hammer if you had even dared suggest that was going to be the case a year ago. No one would have believed you. I wouldn't have believed you. I don't think anybody would have believed you. It's an absurd notion, an absolutely absurd notion. Let's keep going with this. Obviously, Captain America, the Winter Soldier makes more money than it. If it fails, as all the projections look like right now, that Justice League will not hit $700 million. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 will make more money than it. Here's the real kicker. There is possible here that Doctor Strange, this obscure Marvel character, in his first film, without being introduced in any other previous films, it is possible that Justice League might not even catch Doctor Strange. Again, wrap your head around that just to really get the context of this. Imagine 2 years ago. It's 2 years ago. We know Justice League is on the horizon. It's coming. And to say, Doctor Strange is going to make more money than Justice League. You would have been tarred and feathered and laughed out of the room. And I would have been doing the tarring and the feathering, and I would have been the one laughing as well. I would have thought you were an idiot to say such a thing. And Justice League may pass Doctor Strange. Here's hoping that it does. But we're looking at a situation here where Justice League is going to end up being the number 22, possibly number 23. If it doesn't catch Man of Steel at $668 million worldwide, we're looking at possibly Justice League being the number 24 all-time comic book box office film, which again is just, to quote Vincini, absolutely inconceivable just a while ago. So the train wreck continues. But I also want to go back to that figure that we talked about a little bit earlier here, is that Justice League, in making $16.5 million in the North American box office, there's that number in red, that 59.7, so basically 60% drop in just its second week, which is not terribly unusual, but what is unusual is that no other movies opened this week. Nothing else opened in wide release. And yet Justice League took another 60% drop. That's crazy. That's really crazy. There were a number of people, myself included, I admit, who thought, look, the fact that there's no real competition until Star Wars The Last Jedi opens, the fact that there's no other competition coming in its way to throw any roadblocks up, that could pave the way for Justice League having some legs. And for Justice League maybe exceeding that $700 million mark, breaking even, getting into some profit territory, all that. It's still a disaster. There's no way around it. Justice League is a disaster. But at least, it'll save some face, you know what I'm saying? But even with no other major films opening, it still takes a 60% drop, which is really rather concerning. I've got a comment coming in here from Aussie Nerd who's saying, why are you surprised the DCEU has mainly been terrible? Well, that's your opinion. I happen to like the DCEU films, but I know a lot of people don't, and that's fine. But I'm still surprised because it's Justice League. Like, look, I said Justice League's not going to hit the $2 billion number. Like, I knew that. Justice League was not going to hit $2 billion, which is totally fine. But I still thought at least it would hit $1 billion. I mean, come on, it's going to hit $1 billion because whether you like or dislike the previous DCEU films, it's still a huge name. It's Justice League. So I still thought the name would at least kind of push it over that top. Anthony Everson is writing in on Super Chat saying, big fan, love your work. I agree, reboot DC. And yeah, thank you so much for the comment there, Anthony. Yeah, I've been saying we got to reboot this thing. It's time to reboot the DCEU. That's what we got to do at this point. And I think these box office numbers just kind of bear that out even more. All right, guys, listen, I said I really want to make this part, I really want to make this video talking about your thoughts and opinions on this whole thing. So I'm going to go over to you guys. Once again, if you're just tuning in now, Justice League, it looks like, is not going to hit the $700 million mark. Anything is possible. Maybe it could get a rush, but it's now opened in every major international market already, so we're not expecting to see any late surge coming in. But I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. What are your thoughts? Or what are your opinions? Is this right around where you thought it would be? Is it lower than you thought? Are you disappointed? Are you optimistic? Let me know what you guys think. But simply, if you're watching live, by tweeting to me at John Campea. Send in that tweet at John Campea, and we will get to those tweets just as fast as we can here. Okay, another super chat came in here from Jacob Jansen, who's writing, how can DCU affect the MCU like you've been saying? Well, I believe, like, put it this way. Thor Ragnarok was a hit with critics and with audiences, okay? Big hit. I believe were it not a big hit, if Thor Ragnarok was not big and popular with critics and audiences, I believe that $94 million that Justice League made opening weekend, I believe that number would have been even lower. I believe the fact that a lot of people went out to see Thor Ragnarok 2 weeks earlier, had a really great time at a comic book movie, made a lot more of them come back to the theaters again when the next major comic book movie opened, Justice League, and Justice League ended up making $94 million opening weekend. I believe 100% that if it were not for the popularity of Thor Ragnarok, getting people excited and having a good time at that movie, I think that opening weekend number of Justice League would have been even lower. We would have been talking 80-something million opening weekend were it not for Thor Ragnarok. So that's how I see the cause and effect of these various comic book movies. But anyway, let's go over to Twitter right now. Let's go over here. We're going to start on Twitter, and the first tweet we're going to take in here comes to us from Nathan Vandor, who's writing, John, what baffles me is how much money a movie with Superman as the main character made. Well, and that brings up the other age-old debate and argument we've been having for the past 3 or 4 months is, how do you have a movie where Superman is one of the main characters? Superman, arguably the most recognizable, popular superhero character of all time. You get Superman as a main character, and you don't put him in your marketing. I will never understand that. It's not as if, but John, they're keeping it a secret because he died in Man of Steel. Yeah, but they showed at the end of Man of Steel that he was going to come back to life. You let Henry Cavill put out on social media pictures of him on set that he's in the movie. It's on IMDb. Everybody knows he's in the movie. There was no point in keeping it a secret. And that also, to me, is going to be one of the big question marks heading in. The next tweet comes in from Megbor93, who writes, John, should the DCU be rebooted even if Aquaman gets Wonder Woman type reviews? Yes, because as I said before, look, the underlying stuff here right now is a divisive disaster. That is the underlying stuff that Justice League and the DCU has right now. It's not like the X-Men universe where, yeah, X-Men hit a couple of bumps in the road, like with X-Men 3 and X-Men Origins Wolverine, but it had a foundation of critic and audience celebrated movies in X-Men 1 and X-Men 2. So it could handle that. Right now, this is the analogy I use. Right now, the DCEU is a broken down death trap of a car. But it's got a nice steering wheel, Wonder Woman, and it's got some nice hubcaps if if Aquaman ends up being good. You don't keep driving the death trap car just because you like the steering wheel and you like the hubcaps. You got to reboot this thing. So that's just the way I kind of see that right now. Another live super chat came in from Blind Man, who writes in, thank you so much for writing in, Blind Man, who writes, should DC just make cheaper movies? Are they just overvaluing the franchise? Well, thanks a lot for the question, but let's be fair to Warner Brothers on this. The $300 million price tag that is on Justice League, and that's not even counting the $150 million for marketing, but the $300 million price tag on Justice League is not what they set out to spend. Remember, that wasn't the budget. They ended up needing to go over because of all the massive reshoots and all that kind of stuff that they ended up having to do. That's why they got into the $300 million range. To be fair to Justice League, to be fair to Warner Brothers, it wasn't their choice, like right off the bat, to get into a $300 million movie. That's not what they intended. To answer your general question, should the DCU make less expensive movies? Dude, I believe every studio should make their movies less expensive because it is, and I've talked about this before, I won't go into it now here too, but basically, if you want to know why the cost of movie tickets keep going up and up and up and up, it's directly connected to how much money studios are spending on their movies. We need a holistic reset here to get things back more reasonable, but definitely Warner Brothers and other studios should start making their movies for less money. Another super chat just came in from Enrique Poulos, who writes, this is so disappointing. If you were to reboot the DCEU, which movies would you start with and or what would it look like? Well, I've been saying this for a while now. I believe the best way to restart the DCEU is, hey, you've got a great director in Matt Reeves. I would have preferred Ben Affleck, but Matt Reeves is a great director. You restart with a brand new Batman. Disconnect his upcoming Batman films. They haven't started any real production on that movie yet. Disconnect that movie from the DCEU entirely. Start fresh with Matt Reeves' Batman. Do a Batman trilogy and let that be your launching point for a new cinematic universe. That's my thought anyway, what I think. Maybe you guys have some different ideas so far. Let's see. Let's go on to this one. This tweet comes to us from Eric Cha93 writes, John, did Warner Brothers really have a plan for their DCU or just a collection of films they thought would make money? You know what? For a long time, I thought they had a plan. And then I thought they reevaluated their plan. But then that report came out in the Wrap earlier this week, quoting a source inside Warner Brothers who just gave this expose on just how dysfunctional and how much of a mess everything over at Warner Brothers has been as far as it relates to the DCEU. They have had no coherent plan. They have not gotten everybody on the same page. All the execs at Warner Brothers all want different things and pulling it in different directions. If the report is true, you got a CEO who is sabotaging his own movies just so he can get a bigger bonus check. I mean, things over there are so messy right now. It's really not difficult to understand or to see or recognize why things with the DCEU right now are in like complete disarray at the moment. So we'll see where things go for that. Let's see. This one comes to us from Gore Obsessor. Says, John, they missed up big time not advertising Superman. I agree. Now, look, I'm not saying that if you had had Superman front and center with your marketing, that instead of opening at $94 million, Justice League would have opened to 130. I'm not saying that, but it would have helped. It would have helped. You've got the most recognizable superhero in the world. It certainly would have helped to at least had him in there at some point. Maxobad is putting in a super chat over here, and Maxobad is writing, I don't think they focused enough on Batman in the marketing. And you know what? I also agree with that. Like, I get it. You want to give some attention to Cyborg, and Ray Fisher, I thought, was a very good Cyborg. You want to give attention to Ezra Miller. I thought Ezra Miller was a great Flash. You want to give attention to Jason Momoa as Aquaman. I really like Jason Momoa as Aquaman. But let's call it what it is. Marketing is not about being fair. Marketing is about putting together a marketing campaign that will get people to come into the theaters. Batman is your most important character. Wonder Woman is your one certified hit. They should have had 90% of these trailers focus on Batman and Wonder Woman, and then the other 10% for the other characters. I believe that's the way they probably should have approached it. Again, I'm not saying that automatically means that would have changed the outcome of a $94 million opening weekend to magically $130 or $140 million opening weekend. But again, you have Superman in there, keep the focus on Batman and Wonder Woman, and maybe you're talking about $115, maybe $120 million opening weekend instead of 94. I can't verify that. I can't say that's a fact, but that's just what it seems like to me. Another super chat just came in from Lucas Mello, and Lucas Mello writes in, I still think they should only team movies. Start with Bat Family, then do Shazam, and keep marketing Justice League. DC best stories are team stories. Well, maybe in the comic books. Maybe in the comic books, but this isn't the comic book. So I'm going to disagree with you, Lucas. I mean, you raise a really good point, and I think there's probably a lot of people out there that agree with you on that. I happen to disagree a little bit because just because something works that well on the printed page doesn't mean that's the way it works in the movies. And I think, because look, what have been DC's or Warner Brothers' best DC movies so far? The standalone Christopher Nolan Batman movies. That's been their biggest one so far. And their most beloved, all that kind of stuff. I believe you do that again. You start with Batman. Then maybe start to expand out the Bat family a bit, whether you're talking about Huntress or whoever else you want to bring into it. And then you get wider into a wider DC cinematic universe at that point. But that's just my thought. I could be wrong about that. Who knows? Thanks a lot for the super chat, Lucas. I really appreciate it. All right, let's go on now to just time for a couple of more quick tweets here. Let's see. This tweet comes to us from Warrior8244, who's writing in, John, DC rushed to Justice League. They didn't set it up well. Now they must start from scratch. But you know what? I disagree. I don't think they rushed to Justice League. Justice League was the 5th film in the franchise. To be honest, I think they could have started with Justice League. To be honest, I honestly think they could have started their whole DCEU with Justice League. I really do. And then sent off their individual things from there. Yes, that's opposite from what Marvel did, but just because Marvel did it one way doesn't mean you have to do it that way. The problem was not that they rushed to Justice League. The problem was that they made movies that were divisive amongst critics and divisive amongst fans. That's the problem. You could have made 14 standalone movies before you did Justice League. If those movies ended up being negative critic-wise and divisive amongst the audience, it doesn't matter. We still would have ended up in the same place. That's the problem. You start things off with Justice League and make it a great movie that the critics and the audiences love, then there's no problem. Nobody's having an issue. You start off, you do the DCEU exactly the way they did it with Man of Steel, then BVS, then Suicide Squad, then Wonder Woman, and make all of them critic loved and audience loved, then Justice League is no problem. Justice League is going to be a big hit. So I disagree because there were only 5 or 6 movies into the MCU before they got to Avengers. And that seemed to work for them. So I disagree with you on that part, Warrior. I don't think they rushed to Justice League. It was the 5th film in the franchise. Perfectly fine. The problem was that they made too many movies that the audience was divided on and that the critics disliked. And that led us to a point where the audience has abandoned the DCEU. The audience doesn't have any excitement to rush out to the theater to see a DCEU film. Even though I saw Justice League in theater 6 times, apparently my 6 tickets didn't add to the overall box office that much. But that ultimately, I think, is the big thing that they had with. Anyway, okay, final tweet today that I'm going to take. And this final tweet today comes to us from Estevez. What does that say? Estevez 428 writes, John, do you think bigger name talent would have made Justice League more successful? No, you had big name talent. I mean, everybody already recognized Gal Gadot, despite the fact that I don't think she's a very good actress. She is Wonder Woman, and people liked Wonder Woman. So that's fine. So she's in there. That worked. Ben Affleck's a big name. He's in there. I really don't know that names would have improved it because, again, my whole philosophy on this is it looks like people started to abandon the DCEU before they ever got to it. So, I mean, that's something that hurts. That's something you can't ignore either. All right, guys, last question I'm going to take today comes from the Super Chat again, which comes from Anthony Everson, who writes, if and when the DC Universe gets rebooted, should Jeff Johns still be the Kevin Feige of the DC Universe or go with someone else? Okay, look. I've publicly said I didn't like the hiring of Jeff Johns to be in the position that he's in. He's a great comic book guy. He's not a movie industry guy. And comic books and movies are 2 different things. So I didn't like the hire. However, I'll be the first one to defend Jeff Johns here because when Jeff Johns came in, this whole Justice League thing was already in motion. You can't really pin the blame for Justice League on Jeff Johns. It was too far along by the time he got involved. This is not his fault. So I don't think we've had an opportunity to see what kind of influence Jeff Johns can have in a DC cinematic universe until Aquaman comes out. Once Aquaman comes out, and then maybe once the Matt Reeves Batman films come out, then I think we can start to get a picture as the influence he's having and how good or how negative it can be. But I do not think, to be honest with you, that we can pin this on Jeff Johns. Not at this point, not yet. I think we need to give him a chance. And after we give him a chance, then we can make our evaluation. But right now, I still think it's a little bit too early to start wondering or debating whether or not Jeff Johns is to credit or is to blame for what's happening in the DCEU. Anyway, guys, that will do it for this little quick special installment of our box office report here on Sundays. Once again, it looks like, and according to Forbes Magazine, it looks like Justice League right now is projected to not even hit $700 million and could potentially come up short of Doctor Strange, which is just inconceivable to think of. You can't overstress like how much of a disaster this has actually turned out to be for Warner Brothers and DC, which is just a shame because they got some of the best comic book characters there are out there. But I want you guys to continue in with this. What do you think about this whole situation? How do you think this is all going to turn out? What would you do if you were suddenly put in charge of Warner Brothers and the DC universe there? How would you navigate and handle this whole thing? I want to hear your opinions. Jump into the comments section below and leave me your thoughts. While you're here, guys, make sure you click subscribe. Become a subscriber to my YouTube channel. Click the thumbs up button. Follow me on social media, on Facebook and on Twitter, simply at John Campea. That'll do it for me, guys. Thanks a lot for joining me. And until next time, bye-bye.